The stars flickered as another world fell. The Voidborn came without warning, their crystalline ships cutting through space like knives through silk. They arrived at Nexus Prime first, one of the oldest and most peaceful planets in the galaxy. No one expected an attack. No one survived to send warnings. By the time the Galactic Alliance understood what was happening, 3 more systems had gone dark. The crystalline invaders moved faster than any fleet in known history. Their weapons sliced through the strongest. Shields, their hulls reflected energy weapons, and their strange technology let them appear and disappear at will. "They're unstoppable," whispered Representative June as he watched the holographic display showing another red dot, another fallen world. The Alliance War Council room had grown quieter with each passing day, as hope drained away. Admiral Hyun slammed her fist on the table. "Nothing is unstoppable. We just haven't found their weakness yet." But weeks turned into months, and no weakness emerged. The Voidborn conquered 12 major systems, then 20, then 40. The greatest military minds across 100 species could not find a way to fight back. Alliance battleships, once the pride of the galaxy, were now just scrap metal floating in space after failed engagements. On Ethereal, a planet known for its deep blue oceans and floating cities, civilians crowded onto any ship that could fly. The Voidborn were only 3 days away. Captain Jin watched from the bridge of his transport vessel as thousands pushed to board the remaining ships. "We can't take any more," his first officer said. "We're already past safety limits." Jin looked at the desperate faces below. "We'll make room," he said quietly. "They'll die if we leave them." Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. The grand cities of Luminar, the orbital habitats of the Nyx system, the underground civilizations of Terras II, all evacuated in panic as the crystal ships approached. The Galactic Alliance, once spanning over 300 star systems, controlled barely 70 after 4 months of fighting. The Council, originally formed of representatives from 89 species, now had only 31 members attending emergency sessions. "We should sue for peace," suggested Representative Suk during one such session. Her species had already lost their homeworld. "The Voidborn don't respond to communications," Admiral Hyun reminded her. "We've tried every frequency, every language, every possible code. They simply continue their advance." The scientific minds of the Alliance worked frantically to understand the invaders. The Voidborn ships were like nothing seen before, partly organic, partly crystalline, with an inner structure that seemed to shift and change. "They might not even be ships as we understand them," explained Chief Scientist Day to a room of tired officials. "They might be the Voidborn themselves, some kind of silicon-based life form that exists in space naturally. Whatever they were, they continued their relentless push inward from the galactic edge, taking system after system. Military resistance became increasingly rare. Most planets now simply evacuated when they detected the approach of crystal ships. The refugees fled. Toward the outer rim, the least explored regions of the galaxy, ancient star maps showed thousands of potentially habitable worlds there, far from the Voidborn advance. It was their only hope. On the refugee transport Stardust, young engineer Mina tried to keep the overtaxed engines running as they pushed. Toward the rim, the ship carried nearly 3 times its designed capacity. "How much longer?" asked an older woman, helping Mina hold a cracked power coupling together. "If the engines hold 3 more days to the Veiled Sector," Mina replied. "The Alliance has an outpost there." The woman nodded. Like everyone else, she had lost everything. "My daughter said humans live somewhere out there, in the rim sectors," Mina had heard the same stories. Humans were something between myth and cautionary tale, a species so aggressive they had supposedly been contained to their own system long ago. "Just stories," Mina said, focusing on the repair. "But even if they're real, would we want their help? The old tales say they're dangerous." The ship shuddered as the engines strained. Through a small viewport, Mina could see other refugee ships, hundreds of them, all fleeing in the same direction, carrying the last free people of a dying civilization. At Alliance headquarters, now relocated to a moon base at the edge of controlled space, Admiral Hyun studied reports from the latest encounters. The Voidborn had taken the mining colonies of Saris, the agricultural worlds of the Verdant Belt, and were now approaching the heavily populated core systems. We have maybe 2 months before they reach the core, she told the remaining council members. After that, organized resistance will be impossible. An aide rushed in, handing her a data tablet. Admiral, scouts report the Voidborn have changed course. They're moving faster toward the Valerian Nebula. Huon frowned. The Valerian Nebula had no strategic value, no major populations. Why would they? She began, then stopped as understanding dawned. The refugee fleets. They're targeting the refugee fleets. The room fell silent. Their last hope, evacuating people to safety, was being cut off. The galaxy continued to burn, and there seemed to be nothing anyone could do to stop it. Ambassador. Kim's shuttle approached the blue planet with caution. Through the viewport, Earth looked peaceful. Oceans of deep blue, swirling white clouds, and patches of green and brown landmasses. Hard to believe this was the infamous Death World that Alliance records warned about. "Are you sure about this?" asked his aide Tay. "The quarantine protocols were put in place for a reason." Kim nodded, his wrinkled face showing the strain of recent months. "We're out of options. The Voidborn have taken 8 more systems since we began this journey. Their small diplomatic vessel had traveled for weeks, following ancient star charts, to this isolated corner of the galaxy. Earth was neither on standard trade routes nor mentioned in modern Alliance education. Its existence had been deliberately obscured, known only to high-ranking officials. As they entered the atmosphere, Kim reviewed what little information the Alliance archives contained about humans. They evolved on a high-gravity world with extreme weather patterns and surprising biodiversity, including an unusual number of predator species. They developed technology rapidly, moved from first flight to space travel in less than a century, and had an unfortunate tendency to solve problems through conflict. "Their history is full of wars," Tay murmured, reading the same files. "They fought each other over everything, resources, beliefs, even slight differences in appearance. And yet they unified eventually," Kim pointed out. "That says something about their adaptability. The shuttle's sensors detected artificial satellites and orbital stations as they descended, far more than expected for a quarantined civilization. The communication system suddenly activated. 'Unidentified vessel, you have entered Earth-controlled airspace,' came a calm voice in perfect standard galactic. 'Please identify yourself and state your purpose.' Kim exchanged surprised glances with Tay. Humans shouldn't know standard galactic. The quarantine was supposed to prevent any contact or cultural exchange. "This is Ambassador Kim of the Galactic Alliance. We come seeking audience with your leaders on a matter of urgent importance." There was a brief pause before the voice responded. "Understood, Ambassador. Follow the guidance beacon to Washington Landing Field. An escort will meet you there. As P." They landed. Kim was struck by the orderly nature of the human city below. He had expected primitive settlements or chaotic urban sprawl. Instead, he saw clean lines, green spaces, and infrastructure that rivaled core world design. The reception committee waiting on the landing pad was small, just 4 humans in formal attire, rather than the military presence Kim had feared. The tallest stepped forward with an expression Kim couldn't quite read. "Ambassador Kim, welcome to Earth. I'm Director Sung of the Bureau of Extraterrestrial Affairs. We've been expecting a visit from the Alliance for some time, though I admit, not under these circumstances." Kim struggled to hide his shock. "You know about the Alliance?" Sung's lips curved slightly. "We've been monitoring your communications networks for over a century. Your encryption is serviceable." They were escorted to ground transport vehicles, sleek, silent machines that hovered slightly above the road surface. Through the windows, Kim observed hundreds of humans going about their daily lives, some glancing curiously at their convoy. "Your civilization seems far more advanced than our records suggest," Kim ventured. Director Sung nodded. "The quarantine had an unexpected benefit. When your alliance decided we were too dangerous to join galactic society, we turned our focus inward. Without external trade or influences, we developed along our own path. They arrived at a large, domed building where more officials waited. Kim and Tay were led through security scans and into a circular room where a woman sat behind a simple desk. "Ambassador Kim, I'm President Lee," she said, standing to greet them. "I understand you've come a long way." Kim bowed slightly. Madam President, I represent what remains of the Galactic Alliance. We face extinction at the hands of an enemy we cannot defeat, crystalline entities we call the Voidborn. They've destroyed nearly 2/3 of our territory in less than a year. He activated a holographic projector, showing the Voidborn advance across the galaxy map. President Lee studied it calmly, her expression revealing nothing. "And now you seek our help," she stated, "despite the fact that your alliance isolated us for 3 centuries." Kim swallowed hard. This was the moment he had dreaded. "Yes, the quarantine decision was made before my lifetime, but the records indicate your species was deemed too unpredictable for integration." "Too violent, you mean?" President Lee corrected. She wasn't asking. "The Alliance feared that human aggression might disrupt galactic peace," Kim admitted. "The Council voted to monitor your development from afar until you had evolved beyond certain tendencies. He expected anger, perhaps even immediate ejection, from the planet. Instead, President Lee exchanged glances with her advisors before pressing a button on her desk. A larger holographic display activated, showing a far more detailed map of the galaxy than Kim's, including precise positions of Voidborn fleets and projected movement patterns. "We've been tracking them since they first appeared," she explained. "Our deep space monitoring network extends well beyond our solar system." Kim stared in disbelief. "You've been watching?" "Of course." President Lee stood and walked around her desk. "Ambassador Kim, humanity learned long ago that isolation doesn't mean ignorance. We've prepared for threats, including the possibility that the Alliance itself might someday turn against us." She gestured to an aide who handed her a data tablet. "Earth will provide immediate military support. Our fleet has been on standby since the Voidborn first appeared. We were waiting to see if you would ask for help or continue to pretend we don't exist." Kim felt a mixture of relief and shame wash over him. "The Alliance may have made a terrible mistake in judging your people." President Lee's expression softened slightly. "Perhaps not entirely. We are capable of great violence when threatened. The difference is that we've learned to direct it appropriately." She handed him the tablet showing Earth's military resources, ships, weapons, and technologies, beyond anything in the Alliance arsenal. "The Voidborn are about to discover that quarantining humanity didn't weaken us," she said. "It just meant we developed without constraints." The lunar surface stretched out in grey monotony beyond the observation deck's massive windows. Ambassador Kim stood beside President Lee, his mouth slightly open, as the floor beneath them trembled with the distant rumble of massive engines. "It should be visible any moment now," President Lee said quietly. Kim had been on Earth for 3 days. 3 days of briefings, tours of military facilities, and increasingly shocking revelations about just how advanced human technology had become during their isolation. But nothing had prepared him for this. The dark shadow emerged slowly from behind the curve of the moon. First came the forward section, a reinforced wedge bristling with sensor arrays and weapon ports. Then the central command spine, housing navigation systems and the bridge. Finally, the massive engine section appeared, glowing faintly blue as power systems initialized. The HSS Thunderstorm hung in space like a metal continent, dwarfing the support vessels that buzzed around it. 5 kilometers from bow to stern, it was larger than many space stations Kim had visited. That's impossible," he whispered. "No civilization builds ships that size. The structural integrity problems alone were solved about 80 years ago," interrupted a voice behind them. A woman in a crisp uniform approached, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Captain G.U. Park. I'll be commanding the Thunderstorm." President Lee made introductions as Captain Park joined them at the viewport. "Is this your first Dreadnought?" Kim asked, still staring at the colossal vessel. "3rd generation," Park replied. "The first was half this size, more of a proof of concept." "But why build something so large?" Kim's aide Tay asked from nearby. "The resources required must be—" "Because we needed something that could stand alone against an entire fleet," Park said simply. "Humanity has always prepared for worst-case scenarios. Being quarantined by your alliance only reinforced that mindset." The captain pointed to various sections of the ship as she explained its capabilities. "Conventional weapons along the forward sections, Missile bays along the ventral spine, point defense systems covering every approach angle. Kim nodded slowly, understanding dawning. You built this expecting to fight the Alliance someday. Captain Park's expression remained neutral. We built this expecting to fight someone. The universe is too big for there not to be threats out there. A technician approached, handing Park a tablet. She reviewed it quickly. The thunderstorm will be ready for departure in 6 hours. The battle group is already assembled. President. Lee turned to Kim. You should contact your remaining Alliance leadership. They'll need to be prepared for our arrival. Kim was escorted to a communications center where he could send encrypted messages to Alliance headquarters. On the way, they passed through engineering levels where teams of technicians prepared systems for the upcoming deployment. In one large laboratory, screens displayed detailed scans of void-borne ships. A team led by a middle-aged man worked frantically at various stations. Ambassador, President Lee said, "This is Chief Engineer Kang, the mind behind our phase-lock technology." Kang looked up briefly from his work. Deep lines etched his face, evidence of too little sleep and too much stimulant drink. The ambassador from the people who left us to rot on our death world. Charming. Sukho, President Lee said warningly. Kang sighed and put down his tools. Apologies, I've been awake for about 50 hours now. The engineer is making final adjustments to our primary weapon against the Voidborn, President Lee explained. Perhaps you'd like to explain, Sukho? Kang gestured to the screens. We've been monitoring your Alliance communications for decades. Military channels, scientific exchanges, everything. When the Voidborn appeared, we collected all available data. He brought up a 3-dimensional model of a Voidborn ship rotating slowly. These aren't just ships. They're partially living organisms, silicon-based life that exists in a state of quantum flux. That's why your weapons fail against them. They're partially phased into another dimension. Kim stepped closer to the display. How could you possibly know that? Even our best scientists haven't determined. Because we're not constrained by conventional thinking, Kang interrupted. When you've been isolated for centuries, you develop different perspectives. Your scientists kept trying to understand the Voidborn using established theories. We started from scratch. He pressed a button, and the display showed what looked like a complex energy field surrounding a Voidborn vessel. They exist in multiple states simultaneously. That's their strength, and their vulnerability. Our phase-lock technology forces them to remain fully in our dimension, making them vulnerable to conventional weapons, Kim whispered. Exactly. Kang pointed to another screen showing simulations of the technology in action. One burst from our phase-lock projectors, and they're as solid and vulnerable as any normal ship. Captain Park, who had been quiet during the explanation, checked the time. We should head to the bridge. Final preparations are underway. They made their way through bustling corridors to the heart of the massive vessel. The Thunderstorm's bridge was a marvel of efficiency, circular, multi-tiered, with workstations arranged around a central command area. Through the main viewport, Earth hung like a blue jewel against the blackness of space. As systems came online, Captain Park settled into her command chair. Status report. All systems at 98% readiness, replied her first officer. Battle group reports ready for jump sequence. Park nodded and turned to President Lee and Ambassador Kim. We'll be departing for the Centauri system first. Intelligence. Suggests it's the next major target for the Voidborn. Kim stepped forward. Captain, I must warn you. Alliance reports indicate at least 30 Voidborn vessels in that sector. Even with this ship, 34 vessels, according to our latest scans, Park corrected. And yes, we're aware of the odds. Around them, the bridge crew worked with practiced efficiency, their faces showing determination rather than fear. An officer approached with a data tablet. Final authorization codes from Earth Command, Captain, he said. The rest of the fleet is standing. By. Park took the tablet, entered her confirmation, and handed it back. Signal the fleet, we jump in 30 minutes. She turned to her guests. Ambassador Kim, you'll find observation quarters prepared for you 2 decks down. President Lee, the secure communication link to Earth Command is ready in your suite. President Lee nodded and placed a hand on Kim's shoulder. Ambassador, you're about to witness something the galaxy has never seen. Humanity unleashed. As the countdown to departure began, Kim watched the controlled chaos of the bridge. These humans moved with purpose and confidence. There was no panic, no hesitation, just grim determination. For the first time since the Voidborn appeared, he felt something like hope. Outside, the support vessels moved away as the Thunderstorm's engines brightened from blue to brilliant white. The massive Dreadnought turned slowly, its shadow falling across the lunar surface as it aligned for jump. The shadow of humanity's vengeance was about to fall across the stars. The Thunderstorm burst from hyperspace with its weapons already hot, the massive Dreadnought silhouette blocking out the stars as it arrived at New Centauri. Commander Choi stood on the bridge, his face illuminated by the grim scene displayed on the main view screen. Below them, the colony world burned. Thousands of crystalline Voidborn ships swarmed like angry wasps, their energy beams cutting deep, wounds into the planet's surface. "We're too late," whispered Lieutenant Park, the tactical officer, her voice breaking as she watched a settlement disappear in a flash of light. Choi's grip tightened on the railing. "No, we're right on time." He turned to face his crew, determination etched on his weathered face. "This ends today." The bridge crew snapped to attention, memories of Earth's fall driving away any fear. For 3 years, they'd run from the Voidborn, watching colony after colony fall to the crystalline invaders who seemed immune to conventional weapons. But now they had a chance, a desperate one. "Status of the phase lock system?" Choi asked, his voice steady despite the weight of humanity's survival pressing down on him. Chief Engineer Lakshmi looked up from her station, dark circles under her. Eyes after 72 sleepless hours, perfecting the experimental technology. "Online, sir, but untested in actual combat. The power requirements are enormous. And the tungsten rods? Loaded and ready, all 24 tubes prepared for magnetic acceleration." Choi nodded and opened a ship-wide channel. "All hands, this is Commander Choi. Below us lies New Centauri, home to 3 million colonists. It's the last major human settlement outside of Earth's ruins. If it falls, we become an endangered species." He paused, watching as the Voidborn ships began to notice their arrival, several breaking away from the bombardment to investigate the newcomer. "For 3 years we've run because their phase-shifting hulls made them nearly invulnerable to our weapons. Today we have a chance to change that. The Thunderstorm was built for this moment. We will not fail." He closed the channel and turned to his communications officer. "Send word to the colony. Tell them to hold on. Help has arrived." The young officer nodded. "Sir, I'm getting numerous distress calls from the surface. The main spaceport is under heavy attack. There are thousands of civilians trapped there." Lieutenant Han stepped forward from her station. "Sir, request permission to launch fighter squadrons. We can protect the evacuation ships." Choi considered for just a moment. Launching the fighters before testing the phase lock would expose them to terrible risk. But those were civilians down there, families with children. "Permission granted, but stay within range of our phase lock umbrella once it's activated." Han saluted sharply and rushed from the bridge toward the fighter bays where pilots were already scrambling to their ships. The tactical display showed the Voidborn had now definitely noticed them. 50 enemy ships broke formation and accelerated toward the Thunderstorm, their crystalline hulls glittering in the light of New Centauri's sun. "They're taking the bait," Park reported. "Enemy weapons charging." Choi waited until the enemy ships had fully committed to their attack run. The first energy bolts from the Voidborn ships splashed against the Thunderstorm's shields, causing the lights to flicker momentarily. "Shields at 82% and dropping," reported the defensive systems officer. "Not yet," Choi said, watching the tactical display closely. More Voidborn ships were abandoning the planet's surface, drawn by the larger threat. Exactly as planned. Another volley hit the Dreadnought, stronger this time. The ship groaned under the impact. "Shields at 67%, sir. We can't take much more of this." "Just a few more seconds," Choi said calmly. "We need as many of them in range as possible." On the display, he watched as nearly 300 Voidborn vessels now moved toward them, leaving the colony below with some breathing room. The evacuations could begin. "Now," Choi ordered, "activate the phase lock." Engineer Lakshmi's fingers flew across her console. The ship hummed as power redirected to the experimental system built into the Thunderstorm's hull. "Phase lock generating "Field expanding," she reported, voice tense with concentration. Warning lights flashed across her board as the power drain reached critical levels, field stabilizing at 40,000 kilometers diameter. On the tactical display, something remarkable happened. The void-borne ships, previously showing the quantum fluctuation patterns that made them so difficult to hit, suddenly solidified into stable signatures. "It's working," Park exclaimed. "They're locked into normal space. Their phase shifting has been neutralized." Choi allowed himself a small smile. "Target the largest concentration of enemy ships. Fire tungsten rods, full magnetic acceleration, and..." Thunderstorm shuddered as the first salvo launched. On the view screen they watched as super-dense tungsten rods, accelerated to near-relativistic speeds, streaked toward the void-borne fleet. For 3 years, humanity's weapons had passed harmlessly through the phase-shifting alien hulls. Now locked into normal space by the thunderstorm's field, the crystalline ships were suddenly vulnerable. The tungsten rods tore through the first wave like bullets through glass. Crystalline ships shattered, fragments spinning away into the void. The second wave tried to retreat, but without their phase-shifting ability they were simply conventional targets. "Second salvo, fire!" Choi ordered. Again, the ship vibrated as more tungsten rods launched. More enemy ships disintegrated. Meanwhile, below in the planet's atmosphere, Lieutenant Han led 3 squadrons of fighters toward the embattled spaceport. Through her canopy she could see the desperate scene. Thousands of civilians huddled near evacuation ships, while void-borne ground forces closed in. "Talon Squadron, focus on those crawlers approaching from the east," she ordered through her helmet. "Command Phoenix Squadron, clear a path for the evac ships. Dragon Squadron, you're with me. We're going to hit their command unit." The fighters screamed down through the atmosphere, weapons blazing. Han locked onto a crystalline structure that pulsed with eerie light, the local void-borne command node. Without the protection of their phase-shifting technology, the alien structure was vulnerable. "Dragons, concentrate fire on my target," she called, diving toward the structure. Her squadron followed, their combined firepower converging on the crystal spire. It glowed brightly for a moment, before exploding into thousands of glittering fragments. The effect was immediate. The void-borne ground forces became disorganized, their coordinated attack falling into chaos. "The path is clear," called the Phoenix, squadron leader. "Evac ships launching now." Han banked her fighter and watched as the first civilian ships rose from the spaceport, carrying hundreds to safety. Her heart lifted at the sight. Back on the thunderstorm, the battle in space had turned decisively. With each salvo, more void-borne ships fell. Some tried to retreat beyond the phase lock field's range, but the thunderstorm pursued, maintaining the advantage. "Sir," Park reported with growing excitement, "the void-borne fleet is breaking formation. They're retreating." A cheer went up around. The bridge quickly silenced by Choi's raised hand. "Stay focused. Engineer Lakshmi, how long can we maintain the phase lock?" Lakshmi wiped sweat from her brow. "Another 30 minutes at most before we risk a core overload." "Then we have 30 minutes to clear this system," Choi said firmly. "Launch all remaining tungsten rods. Target their largest remaining ships first." For the next 20 minutes, the battle transformed from a desperate last stand into humanity's first true victory. The Voidborn, seemingly invincible for 3 years, found themselves suddenly vulnerable. Ship after ship shattered under the thunderstorm's relentless assault. Lieutenant Han's fighters escorted the last evacuation ships to safety, while the thunderstorm's weapons cleared the orbital space above New Centauri. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "I'm receiving messages from the colony. They're cheering." Choi finally allowed himself to relax slightly. "Put it on speaker." The bridge filled with the sounds of human voices cheering, crying, shouting with joy and relief. Someone was singing. Children's laughter could be heard. "Phase lock field collapsing in 3 minutes, Lakshmi warned. "We've pushed it to the limit." "Recall all fighters," Choi ordered. "Prepare to jump to safe distance once everyone is aboard." As Lieutenant Han's fighter was the last to dock, the phase lock field flickered and died. The few remaining void-borne ships immediately began to phase shift again, but they were retreating, not attacking. The thunderstorm pulled away from New Centauri, its mission accomplished. On the bridge, Commander Choi looked at his exhausted but triumphant crew. Today we've proven the Voidborn can be beaten, he said quietly. Today, humanity stops running. The tactical display showed the Voidborn ships vanishing into the darkness, between stars. And tomorrow, Choi added, his eyes fixed on the retreating enemy, we start hunting. 6 months after the Battle of New Centauri, Earth's orbital station Unity gleamed like a beacon against the blackness of space. Once a humble research platform, it had transformed into the heart of galactic diplomacy. Ships from 24 species docked at its expanded bays, their exotic hulls creating a patchwork of technologies and designs. Commander Choi stood at the panoramic window of Conference Hall A, watching as yet another diplomatic vessel approached. This one belonged to the Talari, insectoid beings who had remained neutral during the Voidborn invasion. Now, like so many others, they were eager to establish relations with humanity. Quite a change from last year, said Lieutenant Park, joining him at the window. Remember when they wouldn't even answer our distress calls? Choi nodded, his expression thoughtful. Amazing what defeating an invincible enemy will do for your popularity. The door behind them slid open. Director Yoon entered, followed by representatives from the Galactic Alliance Council, a Xylan with blue-tinted skin, a feathered Avari, and a gelatinous Morrigan contained in its environmental suit. These 3 species had led the Alliance for centuries, dictating policy across 17 star systems. Commander Choi, the Xylan representative said, extending 3 fingers in greeting. Your presence honors us. The council session will begin. Shortly. I'll be there, Choi replied with a polite nod. After the representatives moved on, Director Yoon stepped closer. The older woman's eyes crinkled with hidden amusement. They're practically falling over themselves to be courteous now, she murmured. Quite different from their previous attitude toward our primitive species. Before Choi could respond, his communication unit chimed. Sir, the thunderstorm reports successful deployment of phase-lock satellites around Proxima Colony. The system is now secure. Acknowledged, he replied. Another world protected by humanity's new technology. The network was growing. The council chamber hummed with voices as representatives from 37 species found their seats. The curved walls displayed real-time images from across the galaxy, worlds rebuilding after Voidborn attacks, defense fleets patrolling secure systems, and research stations studying captured crystalline technology. At the center of the chamber stood a holographic projection of the known galaxy, with red markers indicating confirmed Voidborn presence. 6 months ago, those markers had been spreading, like a disease. Now they were contained to a handful of remote systems. The Xylan Council leader raised his hands for silence. This emergency session of the Galactic Alliance will now begin. Our primary agenda, establishing a unified defense strategy against any future Voidborn resurgence. Director Yoon took the central platform, her simple dark uniform standing out among the elaborate dress of the alien representatives. Fellow sentients, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. For 6 months we have worked together to push back the greatest threat our galaxy has faced in millennia. Human phase-lock technology, combined with Alliance resources, has contained the Voidborn to the outer reaches. Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the assembly. But today I must share something that may surprise you. She gestured, and the holographic display changed to show Earth monitoring stations dating back 15 years. Humanity detected the Voidborn approach long before they reached Alliance space. The chamber erupted in shocked exclamations. The Avari representative's feathers fluffed in agitation. You knew and said nothing, she demanded. Director Yoon remained calm. We tried. Repeatedly. Our ambassadors were dismissed as paranoid. Our evidence was called inconclusive. The Alliance determined we were too primitive to detect something your advanced civilizations could not. Uncomfortable silence fell across the chamber. When we realized our warnings would go unheeded, we prepared alone. The thunderstorm wasn't our first Dreadnought, it was our 7th. Our phase-lock technology wasn't developed in desperation after the invasion. It was refined over a decade of focused research. The Morrigan representative's environmental suit bubbled as it translated his agitated speech. Why reveal this now? To embarrass the Council? No, Director Yoon said firmly. To ensure we learn from past mistakes. Arrogance nearly doomed this galaxy. Dismissing perspectives because they come from a younger civilization almost led to extinction. On the diplomatic level above the main chamber, Lieutenant Han watched the proceedings with Lieutenant Rodriguez, both now decorated heroes from the Battle of New Centauri. "Did you know?" Rodriguez asked quietly. "About Earth detecting them years ago?" Han shook her head. "I joined the fleet 5 years back. By then, the preparations were already classified as standard defense protocols. I never questioned why we trained so specifically against phase-shifting enemies." Below, the debate had grown heated. The Xylan leader's skin had darkened to deep indigo, a sign of distress in his species. "What exactly are you proposing, Director?" "Yunt?" he asked, struggling to maintain diplomatic composure. "A restructuring of the alliance," she replied without hesitation, "one where all voices are heard equally, regardless of technological development or age of civilization, one where defense is prioritized over bureaucracy." "And if we refuse?" the Avari representative challenged. Director Yoon's expression remained calm. "Then humanity will defend itself, and any worlds that wish to align with us independently. Our phase-lock technology remains our own. We've shared it willingly during this crisis, but we alone control its production." The implied threat hung in the air. Without human technology, the galaxy would again be vulnerable to void-born attack. The Council representatives conferred among themselves, communicating in their native languages. Finally, the Xylan leader spoke. "The Alliance has existed for 12 centuries under its current structure. Change does not come easily to such established institutions." "Neither does survival," Choi interjected, speaking for the first time. "Ask the colonies that fell while debate continued about whether the threat was real." Engineer Lakshmi, attending as a technical advisor, leaned toward her colleague. "This isn't just about defense anymore," she whispered. "This is about power." Her colleague nodded. "Power humanity never sought but now can't avoid holding." The debate continued for hours. Representatives from smaller worlds increasingly sided with humanity, their experiences during the invasion still raw. Worlds that had faced void-born attacks directly spoke of human ships arriving when Alliance forces couldn't or wouldn't respond. As evening approached Earth time, an unexpected alert sounded. The chamber's displays shifted to show hundreds of ships emerging from hyperspace near Earth's orbit. "We're being invaded," gasped a representative from a species that had suffered heavily in the early days of the void-born attack. Director Yoon checked her personal device and smiled slightly. "No, we're being acknowledged." The displays showed vessels of all shapes and sizes, not military ships, but civilian craft. Private vessels, merchant ships, passenger liners. "We're receiving transmissions from these ships," announced the communications officer. They're bringing gifts, tributes, from worlds across the galaxy, even beyond Alliance space." Images flashed across the screens, precious minerals, advanced technologies, cultural treasures. Each ship carried thanks from worlds that had heard how humanity had turned the tide against the supposedly invincible enemy. "The people of the galaxy have made their choice," Director Yoon said quietly. "Even if their governments haven't yet." The Morrigan Representatives Translation Unit hummed. "You planned this demonstration, didn't you?" "I assure you, this is as surprising to me as it is to you," Director Yoon replied honestly. "But perhaps it clarifies matters." 2 days later, after intense negotiation, the revised Galactic Alliance Charter was signed. Humanity received a permanent seat on the High Council, alongside the 3 ancient races. The new defense directive placed human officers in key positions throughout the combined fleet, with Commander Choi appointed as Supreme Defense Coordinator. As the signing ceremony concluded, the Xylan leader approached Director Yoon privately. "There are some who will say Earth orchestrated the entire void-born crisis to rise to power," he said, his voice low. She met his gaze steadily. "There are always conspiracy theories. The truth is simpler. When threatened, we prepared. When attacked, we fought. When others needed help, we gave it. And now you protect us all," he observed. "Not just us," she corrected. "All of us together, but with clear leadership and purpose." The galaxy spent too long in comfortable debate, while danger grew. Later that evening, On the observation deck of Unity Station, Commander Choi found Lieutenant Han staring out at the galaxy. "Thinking about New Centauri?" he asked. She nodded. "And everything that's happened since. 6 months ago we were fighting for survival. Now we're practically running the galaxy." "Not running," Choi corrected. "Protecting." Below them, Earth glowed blue and peaceful. No longer just a forgotten world on the edge of Alliance space, but the center of a new galactic order. Around it orbited ships from 100 worlds, not in fear, but in respect. "What comes next?" Han asked. Choi considered the stars beyond the window. "We rebuild what was lost. We prepare for the next threat, whatever it may be." He paused. "And we remember what got us here. Not arrogance, but vigilance." In the distance, the thunderstorm moved into position near the new defense grid, its silhouette a reminder of humanity's resolve. Not conquerors, but protectors. Not rulers, but guardians. The galaxy would sleep peacefully tonight, under the watchful eyes of its newest defenders.